No Small Endeavor is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. What if comparing car insurance rates was as easy as putting on your favorite podcast? With Progressive, it is. Just visit the Progressive website to quote with all the coverages you want. You'll see Progressive's direct rate, then their tool will provide options from other companies so you can compare. All you need to do is choose the rate and coverage you like. Quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. Hello, friends. I'm Lee C. Camp. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our Unabridged interview, Part 1, with Professor Stanley Hauerwas. I started reading Stanley Hauerwas in seminary many years ago, found him provocative, fascinating, and as I would see, seldom does one go away from reading Stanley without some strong opinion. And I've been fascinated through the decades with the strong emotional responses he elicits. Often, I think the judgments are unfair, as you'll hear us discuss, but I've learned so much from Stanley through the years, and slowly over time, I've been privileged to grow in friendship with him, and I've grown deeply fond of him. He's disarming in his honesty, sometimes uncomfortably honest. He has a wonderful Texan laugh, a beautiful mind, a wonderful capacity for storytelling, and I was honored to spend a full day with him on the campus of Duke University. And I'm honored to get to share this interview with you, reflecting a lot on his memoir, Hannah's Child, and the overall scope of his life's work. Enjoy. Hey, friends, if you like listening to stories that teach you something, then I have a great podcast recommendation for you, Cautionary Tales, the chart-topping history podcast from Pushkin. We've all heard the saying, learn from your mistakes, but couldn't the same be true for other people's mistakes? On Cautionary Tales, you hear a treasure trove of mishaps and meltdowns that teach us all something. Each episode, Financial Times columnist Tim Harford mines the greatest fiascos of the past for their most valuable lessons. Some stories may delight you, others may scare you, but they'll all make you wiser. Like, how did efforts to control the weather go disastrously awry? Or, what's the connection between the medieval dancing plague and Havana syndrome? That and more. Don't miss out. Listen to Cautionary Tales wherever you get your podcasts. Stanley Hauerwas is a Texan and a theologian. He's one of the most known and influential still living theologians in the world. He's written loads of books. In 2001, he was named America's Best Theologian by Time magazine. He's often described as contrarian. Perhaps any such devoted Texan could not be otherwise, while at the same time committed to nonviolence, having argued in his Texan contrariness that nonviolence is central to being a Christian. Stanley's alternately loved, oftentimes lambasted, surprisingly on occasion profane and genuinely sweet. He completed his graduate work at Yale University, spent many years teaching at Notre Dame, before teaching the last number of decades of his career at Duke. And I'm grateful to be sitting here with you, Stanley, in your office at Duke. And I've been really looking forward to this and grateful to get to be sitting with you today.
It's great to be with you, Lee.
It's a delight. It's
just one thing.
Yeah.
I wasn't named America's best theologian. I was named the best theologian in America.
Best theologian in America.
Right.
Yeah, so, that's quite different for you. I mean, important.
It is.
A distinction for you. Well, we'll have opportunity to talk about that. I want to start with a story that you tell in your memoir, Hannah's Child, that you became a theologian because you couldn't get saved?
Right. Yeah. I grew up in a Methodist church where you were baptized on Sunday morning, but you had to get saved on Sunday night. Pro football hadn't gotten there yet. I recently noticed that on the Sunday night start of the game, they call that song that dominates an anthem.
Yes.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
Pro football, I mean, this is a Texan thing.
Yes.
Pro football is taken over Sunday night.
Yes.
I bet, were you raised Sunday night?
Oh, yes. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night.
And so Sunday night, you needed to be saved.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't get saved. I didn't think you should fake it. And I was about 15, and I'd started to date, so I was sinning. And so I thought, I've got to be saved here. But finally, I decided that if God wasn't going to save me, I could at least dedicate, and some other kids in the church had been doing this, dedicate my life to God. God knows what that meant.
Yeah.
And God would have to treat me well because I was doing the right thing. So we were singing one Sunday night, I Surrender All, for the 25th time with the altar call.
Yes.
And someone had to come up.
Yeah.
And finally I decided to hell with it. So I went up and dedicated my life to the Lord. And of course, everybody gathered around you, put hands on you. And we had an associate minister at this church who had actually gone to seminary. His name was Raymond Butts. And Raymond told me that if I was going to be a minister, I needed to read books. So I read a lot of bad books. But I read, finally, I just happened to be downtown at Cokesbury, and there was a cheap book table. And I bought a book called From Faith to Faith by B. David Napier, who was one of the great Old Testament scholars. And I discovered JEDP, and I thought, well, this stuff isn't true. And then I also bought a book by Nels F.S. Ferre, who was a Swedish theologian. It was called The Sun and the Umbrella, and it was a takeoff on Plato's Cave, in which he suggested that religion probably hid God more than revealed God. And I thought that's probably true, so I would give it up. But I didn't want to tell my parents. But I had no one in my family had ever gone to college. Indeed, the only college people that we knew were the people that taught in school. So I was destined. Of course, I was working every summer, learning to lay brick, but I was destined to go to college. So.
Now, at what point did your mother tell you the story about Hannah and your birth? Was this before you went to college?
Oh yeah, I was probably 6.
Oh,
and we were sitting out on the.
For those who don't know the story of Hannah, you want to tell that story briefly, and how it relates to you.
The story is Hannah was not able to have children. And she prayed to God that if God would give her children, a son, she would give that son to God. And so she got pregnant, and she had Samuel, the prophet Samuel, who was then given to. Do you remember the name of the priest that he was given?
No, I don't.
I don't either.
Yeah, that's bad for both of us not to remember. It's only owing to affirm to the biblical scholars what they claim about the theologians, since they don't remember their Bible.
We don't know the Bible, right? But she gave Samuel to God, and my mother did the same. That she was having trouble getting pregnant. She had me, and she told me that she had given me to God when I was about 6. I say that it was perfectly appropriate for her to do that, but did she have to tell me? I mean, that you and I are sitting here now talking about these matters is probably because she told me when I was 6 that she had given my life to God, and did that become something that you ever resented, or is it just a fact of your life that you accepted, or what was that like for you? I may have resented it sometime. By the time I was going to college, I decided most of the stuff is absolute crap, and I didn't consider myself a Christian anymore. I didn't tell Mother and Daddy that was the case, but going to college was a big help. And
You actually say in your memoir that in undergrad days, you did not understand how an intelligent person could believe in God or be part of a religious tradition.
Right. And I would go to chapel because it was required. But
Which is probably the reason lots of people go to chapel in undergrads.
And I'm sure it's not required now at Southwestern. But what happened, I went to college, and there were two places I looked at because they were Methodist: Southwestern in Georgetown, Texas, and Hendricks in Conway, Arkansas. And I was involved with a young lady that I didn't want to get that far away, so I went to Southwestern because it was closer than Hendricks. Southwestern had about 400 students at that time, and it was a country college, but there was a man there named John Score who was doing his PhD at Duke under Cushman. And John was enough of a Methodist that he was deeply cynical. And I became the philosophy major at Southwestern. And he gave me a 6-semester course on the history of philosophy.
Oh, wow.
And so we read Copleston's history.
All those volumes.
All those volumes.
Wow.
Along with the primaries.
Huh.
So and by reading...
What an incredible
undergraduate
education.
It was wonderful. And I was getting at least smart enough through that reading to think I didn't know enough to be an atheist, because I at least had gotten the idea that to be an atheist is quite an achievement because you have to know the God that you're denying. So I decided that I would go on to seminary.
Huh.
And
before we go to seminary, let me go back to home just a minute. So you're raised the son of a bricklayer.
Right.
And when you think about the ways being raised the son of a bricklayer has shaped you, what are some of the key things that have stayed with you in that regard?
Habit. You need to learn the habits of the craft that you're being initiated into, and that it's craft. And you have to be initiated into it if you're going to do it well by a master craftsman, because you have to imitate the movements. People love to watch bricklayers work because you're not sure how we're doing it, because you throw the line down the course, and you build your lead, and you cut the mud off your mud board and spread it along the course, and then you frog the mud and cut the head joint and put brick on the mud, and you let it kind of float down to the line. Right? And what I've just done is give you an account of laying brick that has a vocabulary to it that you're not familiar with. Frogging the mud, you didn't know bricklayers frogging the mud. You didn't know it. You would have called the line a string. It's a line. So there's a whole language internal to the learning of lay brick that is not unlike how you've got to learn to speak Christian. There's a language to being Christian that is intrinsic to the practices that make Christianity intelligible. So I've always found the initiation into the kind of work that a bricklayer does to be not a bad image for thinking about how to learn to be a Christian.
I mean, it has implications as well. I think I remember years ago reading an interview by you where you commented on the ways in which that tradition as well has an alternative way of thinking about authority. That there's that you can't learn to do that apart from authority.
Right.
So riff on that a little bit for us. Kind of the sort of conceit about autonomy in the modern world versus a craft vision of authority.
The authority is embodied in a tradition that produces people who do it this way rather than that way, because doing it this way rather than that way puts you within the crafts that the narratives display in a way that makes possible learning. I mean, one of the authority most of the time doesn't have to show itself because it's intrinsic to the practices that you're about. What authority, for example, in bricklaying, every once in a while you confront a situation that you're not quite sure how to lay this rowlock, because the architects have put the walls together in a way that no one's seen before. The person in authority is able to respond to the challenges of new situations in a way that those that are followers are able to practice, so that the job can be going on.
Because they're so well schooled in the craft and in the tradition, they can come up with some sort of
alternative.
Yeah. Which, of course, is quite different than, I mean, your account doesn't rule out the fact that there can be really damaging, bad practices of authority.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're talking about power.
Yeah.
Authority always is the exercise of certain powers, and it can be extremely destructive when people with authority use power without it being exemplified through the tradition for the goods that it should represent.
Yeah. When you think about that early experience, or even as you begin to grow into adulthood, obviously your work has talked a lot about virtue. And if you think about acquired virtues, what would you say are some of the other acquired virtues that you've had to be intentional about developing in your life?
I think I've had to be fairly intentional about patience.
Hmm.
In particular, patience toward people I don't like.
Hmm.
I found it very hard, for example, to work for people I don't like. And that's called the modern university, where oftentimes people that I don't like are ambitious, who want to take on positions that make it possible for them to tell me what to do. So learning to be patient in a way that recognizes that they may actually have something good that they represent is a big challenge for me.
Any others immediately come to mind, other required virtues you've had to work on?
It's interesting to me that you use the word acquired. What's the alternative? I mean,
well, I guess here I'm specifically at least pointing to a distinction between the infused with the infused virtues.
I was wondering if you.
Yeah.
I mean, you're a Thomist after all.
Yeah.
Because I mean, the distinction between infused and acquired is Thomas's distinction, and I've always. I mean, Aquinas is quite brilliant on what it means to the infused virtues come from the Holy Spirit. But I've always found the language of infusion, it sounds like an old air pump.
Yeah.
you get problematic.
Yeah.
What it means to be infused, it seems to me, is that you're possessed by ways of life that are unintelligible if they aren't derived from the worship of God. And acquired, Aquinas meant those virtues that Aristotle teaches us through the Nicomachean Ethics, that are part of the Greek way of life. Aquinas turns them in quite fascinating ways to see how charity is the form of all the virtues, transforming the acquired virtues into modes of life that make possible the living of Christians in a way that isn't self-deceptive. So it's not clear to me. I think my biggest challenge is the challenge of developing practical reason, which is a virtue, in a way that gets me through life in a way that isn't self-deceptive. So Aquinas' word for it, of course, is prudentia, and how to be prudent. That is, have a wisdom that transforms a virtue like courage into a virtue that sustains life rather than is just foolhardy, is the kinds of challenges, it seems to me.
Yeah. So that sets up something that's been a major theme in your work, and the sort of emphasis on seeking to tell the truth and seeking to find ways to subvert our own tendency toward self-deception.
Right. Self-deception is such it's such a tricky notion, though it possesses us. I wrote that article years ago on Albert Speer.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of mileage out of that article too. I tell you, that's a wonderful article. You and David Burrell, I think.
Yeah, David, who just died about 2 months ago. But self-deception, it's not self-lying, because if it's lying, you know you're doing it, right. So it's not deceptive. So self-deception is always an invitation. For example, in this dialogue we're having together right now, for us to think and to live out a project of being smart in a way that we don't acknowledge it, that we become self-deceptive. So how to live in a way that you want to know the truth about yourself is a hell of a challenge.
Yeah, you say in that article that, as I recollect, that self-deception requires a policy of a refusal to give an account for some part of one's life.
That's right, yeah. Well done.
I find that super helpful. And so, that's literally helped me in my relationships, where I have very open relationships with friends, where they know everything about me and I know everything about them. That line from that article has helped me remember I need to try to talk about whatever it is I do not want to talk about,
right,
with someone who's trustworthy.
Right. And it's not, you need to want it, but you need help, because you're not sure you know what it is you want.
Yeah.
And to have the language that will help you say that you may not know what you need to say.
Yeah. Right. And to be well known enough by people that they may know what I need to say.
Right.
And invite me to say it.
That's right.
Yeah.
You think about spiritual guidance and people that are good at helping you have a mentor that will listen to what you have to say and say, I don't think you are saying what is true. Spiritual guidance, and I'm not big on the word spiritual.
I did think that was a little out of character for you.
Yeah, but I've never had a relationship between a a person that gives kind of guidance that will tell you that you're probably lying to yourself and that kind of thing. I've never had that, but I've tried to exemplify it in my life through reading. I think reading is one of the ways that we catch ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So, when you think about this kind of motif of telling the truth and subverting our tendency to self-delusion, why do you think that became such a significant emphasis in your work? You say at the end of the memoir you don't do a lot of self-introspection, but I guess I'm asking you to do an introspection question about what do you think is the source of that in your history that became such an emphasis?
My mother drove me crazy. My mother was from dirt poor Mississippi, and she was a woman that was a workaholic, and she would say things like, "You be kind to Mr. Johnson because you never know when you'll need to use him." I mean, if you ever wanted to know what the injuries of class looked like, it looked like my mother. She came from just dirt poor Mississippi. Her father was cotton gin drunk. My father was a wonderful, kind, good man, and she ran his life. And she wanted to run my life. Discovering that I think I loved my mother, but I sure as wanted to escape her too. So coming to terms with the recognition that the world tells you, of course, you love your mother, but you may not, is an invitation to some kind of introspection, I would guess. Then, of course, being married for over 20 years to a bipolar lady, that invites a good deal of introspection. But, you know, I've never been very self-engaged in terms of I just, if you promise to be faithful to someone that's seriously mentally ill, that's what you do. You just do it. And you're not sure what reasons you would be given for having done it. I'm my mother's child. You just do it. And
so do you think, so make a little more explicit for me what you think is the connection between your mother, say, and being having such an emphasis on truth-telling?
I think that you're brought up within a culture that says that you of course, must be supportive of your parents. But you may find that that you have some fundamental differences, and you don't want to bring those into the world because you want to live out the narrative that the world tells you is what makes you who you are.
Mm. So then your experience of having to sort out how to narrate that drives your own kind of pursuit of truth-telling?
I think so. I mean, you take an example would be my father and the gun.
Yeah, would you tell that story?
When I was in seminary, not studying for the ministry, but just trying to find out if this is true. One year, and my father, who I loved deeply and was a wonderful craftsman and an extraordinarily kind man in a very rough line of work. I mean, being around bricklayers doesn't exactly make you a gentleman. But
and his name was
Coffee.
Coffee, yes.
Coffee.
Yeah, Coffee Hauerwas.
Coffee Hauerwas. The Coffee family was northern Georgia, and my grandmother, my father's mother, she and my grandfather had 6 boys. All of them were bricklayers. And my father was next to last, and my grandmother thought that one of the boys ought to remain single to take care of her. She got old, and my father my mother broke into that and got my father to marry her, and he always was very faithful to my mother in terms of what she wanted to get done. But one year, when during the winter for bricklayers, the weather makes it hard to work. And so my Uncle George, who was always into something, was into making a rifle. And he got my father involved in making a rifle. My father cut down the tree, laid the stock, set the sight, everything, 30-06 deer rifle. And when I would talk with my parents, when I was in New Haven, all Daddy wanted to talk about was making this gun. And so, because that's what he had to do during the winter. And we got home that summer, and of course my wife at the time was a very difficult lady and didn't like my parents at all. But we drove up and we went in the front door, and the first thing my father did was take that rifle that he had finished and put it in my hands. And I said, "Oh, this is a beautiful gun, Daddy, but you understand someday we're going to have to take these things away from you people." Can you believe what it? I mean, my father.
I do think the first time I heard you tell that story, I felt a lot of pain. Yeah.
And my father just, he didn't say much, but he was obviously. I was beginning the world, Yale Divinity School, that they couldn't understand. I mean, it's not that they couldn't understand it. They couldn't imagine what it would mean to be in New Haven, Connecticut, Yale. And my father the gun was his life. That I could be at Yale, but I was still part of that culture. That he was giving it to me. Mm-hmm. And I was I didn't get the complexity of the human relations that were present at that time. Years later, I was on a phone call with them, and I can't remember exactly how the phone conversation went, but Daddy said something about the gun, and I said, and he said, I'm not sure what I'll do with it. And I said, don't worry, Daddy, I'll take care of it. And so my mother, when we were visiting my mother and father in Longview, Texas, we got off the airplane, and my mother said, Stanley, you can buy a gun case here and take the gun back with you. And I thought, my father was standing there, and all I could think of was, I don't want a gun in my home. Do you have a gun in your home? No. But I couldn't do anything but take the gun. So I had the gun for some time, and I have a former graduate student named David Toole, who's from Montana, who hunts elk and so on. So I gave him the gun, and he knows the story. And so those kinds of complexities of how to negotiate what it meant. I was truthful with my father.
Right.
Someday we're going to have to take these things away from you people. You people being people that hunt, that I don't hunt, and so on. That those kinds of relations, I said the truth, but I could have said it in a way that gestured to my father that I understood this gun is how much he loves me. But I didn't know how to do that.
Yeah.
And being truthful made it sound like you could be a person that didn't prevaricate.
Yeah, there's one passage near the end of your book where you talk about you're not a leaky vessel. You get it out. And yet one of the things that you also see throughout the book, and just like in the story you just told us, is that you're seeming to have to grapple almost regularly with, I guess it goes back to the notion of prudence, right? So that there is no
right.
There is no virtue apart from prudence. And and you're constantly having to grapple with how does one tell the truth in a way that is virtuous,
Right.
And so I wonder, like in your memoir, when you talk about your experiences that you've had with difficult experience, like you said a moment ago, that one of the things that you've had to work on is patience with regard to frustrating experiences with people that you've worked for. And one of the things that you do in your book is you tell some of these stories, and you tell some of the difficult stories. And so how at this point do you think about how does one negotiate charity in the sense, or charity in the sense of generosity or appropriate graciousness and truth telling? How does that work for you? Or another way to think about it for me would be, one can be too patient, I'll put that in scare quotes, such that you never do tell the truth when you should have told the truth a long time ago.
Right.
So how do you think about holding all of those competing considerations together?
I don't have the slightest idea. I don't think you think about doing the virtuous thing. You do it, but you don't. You don't say, "Gee, I need to be patient here." I mean, you might sometimes do that, but
if you're overthinking it, then it's clearly not yet virtuous for you.
That's right.
Right.
Right, and that you just need to do the right thing. And it's not clear where that comes from. Judgments about how we ought, in certain kinds of situations, we ought to do this rather than that, comes from having done this rather than that in other contexts. And it's probably necessary to become more articulate about what needs to be done. But being more articulate won't necessarily make you more virtuous. Nikolai Hartman's books on the nature of the moral life, who no one reads anymore. I read them under Mr. Christian at Yale. Has an image that virtues ride on the back of good behavior. So you don't try to be patient. It turns out that you become patient by learning how to take the time with this student who drives you crazy, in a way that helps that student become more knowledgeable than they otherwise could be.
It's the Aristotle thing about one becomes courageous by doing courageous deeds.
Right.
The habituation of it. You simply do it, and it becomes a part of you.
And it may involve behavior that you don't necessarily describe as courageous. Only retrospectively, you discover it's made a difference in your life that's courageous.
Yeah. When you were writing Hannah's Child, was there a lot of back and forth with you about whether to tell certain stories about, say, lost friendships or difficult episodes with people you found difficult? Or was it more simply, this is something that you naturally thought had to be told as a part of honestly telling your story?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I would like to say the latter, but I don't know that that's true.
Yeah.
I think there were passages that I wrote about, for example, Dick McBrien, who became my boss at Notre Dame, and he was allegedly re-Catholicizing the department in a way that I thought was deeply unjust and stupid. And I used the memoir at that point to say some very negative things about him. I mean, I was well gone and way in the past, which could have been interpreted as me getting revenge. And I could have been, but and I didn't. I wanted to be careful about how I did that kind of criticism, because when you're doing it, it makes you small. And I didn't want the book to be small, but I should have done it better than I did. I should have. I was trying to. To exhibit the conflicts of why I left Notre Dame, but I didn't have to be. I suppose I didn't have to use the name in the way that I did. You probably didn't notice it very much, did you, when you read Hannah's Child?
Notice what?
My interactions with McBrien.
Oh, no, I read all of that quite carefully. I mean, just because of my years there. And
you knew that world.
Yeah. But I would say, even, I think as a reader of the book, there are other places you do similar kind of very forthright storytelling. And I think one of the things that, the way I experienced that was, I sometimes winced, but at the same time, it has this sort of compelling shape to the narrative, because it's like, it's clear you're being truthful, and there's something that's so compelling about someone telling a truthful story.
When you were at Notre Dame, how did you pick up the story of my being there? Was it still going on?
I think that, so I was there in the 94 to 99, and you had been gone, 10 years by that
10
point?
years.
Yeah. I think generally, what I recollect is that you were both spoken of as a important voice doing important work in the department, and that sometimes you were difficult.
I wonder what people meant by difficult.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. But
there's a story. I don't think it's in the memoir. Did you know Ed O'Connor?
no. Well, no, I don't think so.
You know, he was a very, very conservative CSC, and when my first encounter with Ed was when I was interviewing at Notre Dame. Burchell had brought me to be interviewed, and I didn't know who Ed O'Connor was. He was part of the charismatic movement too.
Oh.
And at the reception where I was brought before the interview, a lot of people there. I came up to Ed O'Connor and I said, "I'm Stanley Hauerwas. I'm from Texas, where it takes 6 syllables to say." I had no idea that it might might insult Ed, but later, when I had left Notre Dame, I ran into Ed. I was running, as a matter of fact. I ran into Ed, and I said, "Oh, Ed, how good to see you." And he said, "Oh, Stanley," he said, "it's good to see you. We don't have people like you here anymore." And he meant it as a compliment. So those years at Notre Dame were wonderful years. I have nothing but gratitude toward that, having been part of that community.
Yeah. It's a beautiful place. Wonderful community.
Have you been lately?
On family vacation a few years ago. Went back through.
The road around the campus is gone, was it?
Well, it seemed like so much around the campus was so different. I could hardly get my bearings sometimes.
I know. It's really something.
So yeah, it's very, very different. So do you think that, and I'll put it in scare quotes, being religious makes us more or less prone to self-deception?
I think I'm going to avoid the word being religious.
Okay.
I think being a Christian can be a very dangerous business because it's an invitation to self-righteousness that can be extremely destructive, both for the person that's self-righteous and for those that they come in contact with. I'm not a pious person. God isn't just there for me in the way it is for other people that I know. I think I'm not pious partly because I don't trust piety. It can make us unaware of what it means to live well, insofar as the piety makes us enjoy too much the habits necessary to be a Christian. So I guess I'm saying that, of course, being a Christian can produce people who scare the out of me. Partly, I think, Lee, that question is to be answered at different context of when it was assumed in this country that almost everyone was, quote, a Christian. That's when being a Christian is really dangerous, because it legitimates claims of righteousness that fail to see that the first thing that you learn as a Christian is how to confess your sin. So it is, in response to the question, is both. How do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that given that in the pursuit of a Christian faith, we have this sort of notion that there's a certain way of life to which we are aspiring, and that kind of stands over us in a certain way as the norm. That very dynamic itself can lead us to be less truthful about ourselves, because it's hard to say we're not living up to that. So it goes back to your notion of, if we reprioritize and say the first order of business is to confess our sins and our shortcomings and failings, that could certainly reduce that sort of temptation to self-deception, I think.
I mean, here we are, people that every Good Friday gets to shout, "Crucify him, crucify him." Mm-hmm. That's who you are. That should at least make possible a more critical understanding of oneself than the celebratory exemplars that we seem to be surrounded by right now.
Yeah.
It's hard to separate that kind of question from the political situation we're in right now. I mean, where did these, quote, evangelical Christians come from? Do you know?
Well, I mean, some of them come from where I live, I mean, and I say that where I live, both literally and metaphorically.
People in Tennessee have gone crazy.
It's a challenging time in Tennessee.
It is.
Yeah. So this, you're raising that. I want to explore that some more, but the way I want to explore it is to ask you first, for those who may not know your work, how, for a lot of people, I think, looking on, who don't understand the Christian world, there seem to be kind of two options. There's the evangelicalism you just pointed to, or there's Protestant liberalism, and then there's the Catholics. But in terms of the kind of the Protestant spectrum, you're clearly neither one of those.
Right.
And so could you, in lay accessible terms, describe how you are neither one of those?
And the two are
American evangelicalism and progressive Protestant liberalism.
I'm not a follower of either because, one, I don't think you get to make Christianity up. I think you receive it through the exemplification in people who live in a way that scare you. I'm thinking of people like John Deere, who has driven his Jesuit brothers crazy because of his commitment to peace. I think of people like Dorothy Day, Peter Mine. So it's hard to be a Christian that it tries to live out what you've learned from them in support. It's hard to be a Christian in support of something called America, which is a country that prides itself on being different, but the difference turns out to be prideful. I describe myself as a high church Mennonite. I've said several times in what I've written, I'm a very simple believer. I've read and some very intellectually demanding, complex materials. Aquinas is no easy read, but I'm a very simple believer nonetheless, because I don't see how you can say Christian nation and at the same time say Jesus is Lord. So I try to help myself and others recognize what loaded things we say as Christians and how the implications may the implications of those simple things we say have remarkable outcomes in ways that Christian America or evangelicals betray. I just don't know the evangelical world, but what I know of it, I dislike intensely. The last thing one should want is a personal relationship with Jesus. That's letting yourself control what Jesus is. When I say you don't get to make Christianity up, you don't get to make Jesus up. I think we're living in a time when we're watching the end of Protestantism come to bear. Protestantism worked. We made Catholicism faithful. I think we're living in a time when it's very hard to know what Christianity looks like. By that, I mean that if the appeal to someone like John Deere or Dorothy Day, if that's what Christianity looks like, we've got some real transitions to go through. When evangelicals seem to think that they have a personal relationship with Jesus, of which they go to church maybe to have expressed. What is not clear is whether they understand outside the church there's no salvation. You don't know what it means to have a relationship with God, and then you go to church to have it expressed. You learn what God it is that makes you go to church, to know what God is. And so I think the Christianity that is so dominant is far too subjectivistic. It's interesting how liberal Christianity, which I clearly am not, is very similar to evangelical Christianity. They both depend upon accounts of experience that, as an individual, that I think is deeply problematic.
Which goes back to your earlier conversation about craft and bricklaying, I guess.
That's right.
Is that you're calling us to consider an account of Christian faith that trains us in language, a way of life, a way to do this, not that.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm quote post-liberal, and what it means for me to be post-liberal is my commitment to trying to help us recognize what it means for Christianity to be a communal faith. And Protestant liberalism takes many different forms, and some of it, I've been deeply shaped by it. But I suppose, I have this mantra that modernity is a time that produced people that believe they should have no story except the story they chose when they had no story. That's, of course, the production of the individual as part of the democratic process. but it also has shaped accounts of Christianity that thinks that I get to make up my mind about what I believe about Jesus. Well, I think you don't get to make up your mind. You got to learn to hold the brick right, to lay it. And I think that Protestant liberalism, presumption that you get to make up your mind about Jesus was a deep mistake.
Hey there, I'm Dr. Maya Shankar, and I'm a scientist who studies human behavior. Many of us have experienced a moment in our lives that changes everything, that instantly divides our life into a before and an after. On my podcast, A Slight Change of Plans, I talk to people about navigating these moments. Their stories are full of candor and hard-won wisdom. And you'll hear from scientists who teach us how we can be more resilient in the face of change. Listen on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Sophie Byard, Tom Anderson, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, Carrie Herman, Jason Sheasley, Ellis Osborne, and Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.